So, welcome back to Silmarillion Total War, and this is going to be quite an interesting one because it's probably the biggest battle, single battle anyway, that I've shown on Silmarillion, and I was also a part of it, and I have to say it was a very fun experience to be a part of it as well. But before we get underway, if you do want to get involved in Silmarillion, I would highly recommend going to the Discord, because unlike Reforged, where the community is big enough and there are enough games usually going on where you can sort of get away with not being on the Discord really and just joining random games, Silmarillion is at a point in development, obviously with the alpha, that the community is a bit smaller because the game isn't fully fleshed out yet, of course. So if you do want to get involved at this stage, really the only way to get into games of this size at any rate is going to be on the Discord and getting involved with some of the players that are setting things up there. So I would definitely recommend that if you were looking to be a part of battles like this yourself. This is also a new map. It's a reworked map, which I believe was the Steward of Dale who made this one. And this is Toll in Gaurhoth. Some of the accents are a little bit awkward to wrap your tongue around, but I shall do my best. And this, of course, you can see this central citadel and this island in the middle that the Orcs have very much claimed for their own here is going to be the centre of their defence. And on either side you can see the encampments, those large tents. You can only imagine that this would be a tent for a Balrog rather than an Orc. But there's a lot going on in this map. There's a lot of choke points. It's a very defensible map as well, so the Orcs that are on the defence as the Elves try to reclaim this land from a fledgling Sauron it's going to be an interesting decision that both sides are going to have to make, because there are several ways through. For example, I'm going to be on the attackers today as part of the Elven Alliance, and we could choose to take the more direct route to the central island. The terrain here is going to be a little bit more favourable than if we decide to avoid it, but it is also a little bit more exposed to any supporting units that the Orcs may have in place, be that artillery or any sort of ranged unit, so it could be quite risky to do that, but it is the most direct route and it does allow us to put pressure on the Orcs right from the start. But also on both sides there are going to be pathways through the mountains, which of course the mountains are going to be quite arduous to try and trek through, but you're less likely to be exposed to units like artillery. There's also going to be less room to manoeuvre, and there's a lot of Orcs to carve our way through here, so the onus is on us to move forward. The Orcs can very much entrench themselves however they wish, and it's going to be up to us to try and dictate the initial parts of this fight. But we'll go through the attacking armies first of all, of which I'm here, and we'll go through, if you want to skip ahead to the battle then that's fine, the timestamp will be in the description below. But I would also suggest that we're going to be going through the army compositions here. It's going to take a little bit longer than it would for Reforged. Not too much longer, I don't want to take too much time up. But obviously with a lot of these units, and it bears a little bit more of an explanation because we've seen a little bit less of them in the past. Especially in a situation like this in larger battles, whereas in the past we've seen in slightly smaller battles perhaps. But here the dynamic's going to be a little bit different. Each faction in Silmarillion as well has really got one thing that they home in on especially, and they usually have one or maybe two standout units which really signify the faction as a whole. For example, I'm playing as the House of Finarfin. Each of the attackers is playing as one of the different Elven factions or Elven houses today, and I'm playing as Finarfin, which in terms of their focus, definitely it's around spears, heavy spearmen, being a little bit more defensive in nature. They're very difficult to break down, but they don't necessarily have the fastest ways of dealing damage. That can be done by other Elven factions, but very tough to wear down for Finarfin. You can see here I've got some scouts of Tauren and Faroth here at the front, which are a light archer unit which wield a two-handed spear in melee, so it means they can be pretty decent against cav as long as they don't get charged. They don't have a great deal of ammo, but what ammo they do have is poison projectiles, so the morale of the defending Orcs will be put into question if I can get them into a good position to fire. But again, they're quite light, so they're reasonably easy to skirmish with. Over here, Archers of Talathdin and basic Elven Archers, nothing special about their projectiles, but their armour is decent for what they are. So you can see the heavier mail in comparison to the scouts there. Just a sort of basic unit of Elven Archers, obviously in support, is always nice to bring. And it means obviously they're going to be decently accurate, but the real powerhouse in terms of the House of Finarfin skirmish line is going to be the marksmen of Nargothrond, because they have the split shot arrows, which of course are very, very effective at firing into blobs, but whether they can get into a good position or not we shall have to wait and see, because of course as the attackers we're going to have less of a luxury to get our skirmishes into a dominating position as we would if we were on the defence. So the Orcs may very well be able to skirmish with me fairly efficiently and effectively if I'm not careful, but I did bring a lot of archers here because having these supporting tools is going to be important, especially with the marksman of Nargothrond. It's one of the best ways that the House of Finarfin can actually deal their damage. Their infantry is very solid, but it's not necessarily the most damaging. I've got a Ballista here, the House of Finarfin, rather than just a normal 3 artillery pieces have 4, so I bought this mainly to be a counteracting tool to enemy artillery that's on the defence. If they stick out too much and they're in a pretty scary position, then I can use the Ballista to take them out. If not, I can always use them as an accompaniment to my already fairly beefy skirmish force. Back here, I've got a detachment of the Wardens of Nargothrond, which is effectively a half-strength unit for half the price, so if you want to save a bit of money but still have some more units on the field, then this is an option for you. Wardens of Nargothrond here, and just in behind we can see the full version of the Wardens of Nargothrond, which is effectively a heavy spear unit, of course. They are fairly pricey. You can have 2 before the cost increases. They aren't the strongest single spear unit that the House of Finarfin have, but they're the best that you can effectively mass up. Certainly I would say that. Got a fair few of them. Swordsmen of Talath Din, pretty much the only sword and board unit you can bring as the House of Finarfin. There's detachments and regular versions of this. You can see 54 is the detachment, 107 is the regular unit. They are a Javelin line infantry hybrid, so even here the House of Finarfin are not fully focused on being an up-close and personal unit in melee. This is another way that's pretty good for the House of Finarfin to deal damage though, because obviously these Javelins are going to be quite effective if you can get them into the right place. Not a lot of ammunition though. If you think of something like the Mithlon Marines or the Seafarers of Nindamos, only their Javelins are not quite as potent as those two units over in Reforged. The Javelins are still a very welcome addition to this very fine all-round unit. My general is going to be in the Sartor Finderato, which is effectively the bodyguard tier spears that you have at your disposal as the House of Finarfin. Very nice defensive unit to have him in, obviously very nice armour, very nice shields, very difficult to wear down. Hit points are not quite as ubiquitous as they are in Reforged, so you do need to be a little bit careful. Your general isn't necessarily going to last forever in a unit like this, but he's definitely going to be better off here than he would be in a lot of other units, so very, very tough unit of spears to wear down. This, though, I would say is probably the most significant unit in the House of Finarfin's roster. I've got a couple of units of Bridge Wards of Nargothrond. A lot of factions will have one kind of unit that no other factions have got access to, or at least very few other factions will have access to. And as it stands, the Bridge Wards of Nargothrond are the only dedicated pike unit in the game. So that's obviously a massive deal in a choke point fight. If you can get the pikes into a situation where they're not being focused down by enemy archers or their formation isn't being compromised from the sides, they are an incredibly useful tool for the House of Finarfin. Obviously, again, the same thing applies. Pikes in general don't do damage very quickly, but over a long period of time, the advantages they provide are enormous. 3 units of the Defenders of Talath Din, which are the basic spears I've got, obviously not as good as the Wardens of Nargothrond, but you can bring more of them and they're here in greater numbers and they make up the main backbone of my army. And I also have another unit here. This is probably the one infantry unit in the House of Finarfin's roster which is a genuine out-and-out damage dealer, another bodyguard tier unit, the Arqueni Morma Gilwa. So obviously the Knights of the Black Sword, I believe that translates to. Something along those lines. A very, very damaging unit in melee, obviously heavy swordsman, and stands in stark contrast really to the rest of the Finarfin roster. Moving on, we will move on to J-Monster, so he's going to be in the game as well. It's worth saying that this battle was on a stream a couple of days ago as well that we were playing on, so if you have already seen it, then welcome back once again. And he's going to be playing as the Guarded Realm of Doriath, which Doriath in comparison to Finarfin are not polar opposites, but definitely their focuses are. Doriath are much more focused around dealing damage in melee rather than being a little bit more on the defensive side of things like Finarfin. Axes in particular are a big theme throughout Doriath's roster. You can see here the mounted company of Regen. I'm not sure it's Regen. I'm pretty sure it's Regen, not Regen. But the mounted company, obviously out and out melee cavalry. Very low charge bonus, but very good in melee against other cav forces, so good to use on the defense, especially with the Orcs on the defense. The Dominion of Tol and Gaurhoth can bring a lot of wargs, so a unit like this is going to be very good at dealing with their overwhelming numbers, in theory. Here we have the Shield Bearers of Regen, so they're going to be a unit which obviously would not be out of place actually in the Finarfin roster. The armour is decent, the shields are rather large as well, obviously spears, very nice on the front line, very tough and durable. Good for zoning out the wargs as well, but this is the one unit really in the Doriath roster which is a little bit more focused around their defensive abilities, as most spears are, whereas a lot of Doriath's roster tends to be swordsmen and axemen capable of dishing a lot of damage out. Spear Host of the Girdle, so this is the Javelin hybrid unit that Doriath have. They have a spear as well, a little bit more lightly armoured. I think they have a little bit more ammo than the Swordsmen of Talath Din as well, at least that was definitely the feeling I got having played both of these factions. So obviously with the Javelins, very nice, a little bit more lightly armoured though, so very much a supporting tool for the main event, which is going to be the centre of Doriath's infantry. Axe Guard of Regen, so again a line infantry armed with an axe means they're going to have a significant amount of damage that they can do. If they can close into melee, that's going to be very, very nice for them. But again, in comparison to my heavy spears, they are a little bit more fragile, so that is the trade-off. Their bodyguard unit in comparison to my Arqueni is going to be the Donath en Mablung. So they, of course, have got those big great maces, which means they're going to have heavy armour-piercing damage, but they aren't necessarily going to be as good, again, at keeping themselves alive as the Arqueni with their superior melee skills. So there is that relationship still going on, but the AP going to be very useful, especially against the potential of dealing with units from Angband. Just in behind, we have the sword version of the line infantry, the sword host of Regen, so a little bit more defensively focused, but even so, it's something that I really don't have at my disposal playing as Finarfin, having access to a unit like this, which is on a slightly higher level in terms of dealing damage. Very, very nice, but this is also another unit which is something which isn't really all that omnipresent in the game at the moment either, which is a unit of standard armour-piercing shock infantry that you can bring in numbers. Warriors of Regen, if they can get into melee against the Orcs, they will be able to deal huge armour-piercing damage. So against Angband in particular, they will be very, very handy. But just in general, a unit like this would be a very nice complement to my front line, which is a lot more defensive. Wards of the Girdle, another poison arrow unit, so we're going to have plenty of poison arrows we can pour into the enemy again, quite lightly armoured though, and unlike my unit, they don't come armed with a spear on their back, so they might be a little bit more vulnerable to wargs. And then more shield bearers here at the back. Then we move on to the House of Feanor, and their focus, as I'm sure you can see, is heavier units, but in particular their heavy cavalry. If you can give a weapon to each of the factions so far, for Finarfin it would be a spear, for Doriath it would be an axe, and for Feanor I would say it would most certainly be a lance. And you can see over here that he has also brought a Ballista. So again, you can see only 3 on the Feanor Ballista, but still, for much the same reasons as mine, should be quite useful for trying to snipe out enemy siege. Footmen of Amras with the armour upgrade as well, a really, really strong unit of line infantry. Obviously heavily armoured, much more survivable than the sword host of Regen we saw, but also with the armour upgrade like this, it can be quite expensive to bring units in this number. Defenders of Aglon, so swords are also a big focus of the House of Feanor. A lot of their units come armed with that. Defenders of Aglon with the armour upgrade here, obviously really, really nice sword master unit to have in melee, albeit that lack of a shield can be a bit of a problem, especially early in a fight when everyone still has all their ammunition. Mounted Company of Gaurhoth, so mounted javelins, they can go in and out, sort of cycling in towards the enemy and throwing their javelins and then getting back out. We'll see how effective they can be at doing that. Shield Bearers of Halavorn and the House of Feanor do have access to some human units to help pad out their army a little bit more, because a lot of their units, well, their Elven units are very, very expensive, so you do have to be on the lookout for that. Shield Bearers of Halavorn, however, can definitely give you a bit more in terms of numbers, as can the Rangers of Halavorn, which are armour-piercing javelins. Most javelins are, but a few aren't. Stalkers of Galleon, for example, are not, which are another option Feanor have. Rangers of Halavorn are, of course, more expensive, but if you can get them into position and start throwing their javies into the Orcs, could be very effective indeed. Archers of Amrod with the armour upgrade, again, in comparison to both my archers and Doriath's archers, the armour for Feanor is going to be just that little bit thicker, so they should be good in a skirmish fight, but again, overwhelming numbers are what the Orcs will probably try to use to out-skirmish a unit like this. The Roqueni Magloro, which this is again a unit which no other faction really has access to. A unit of really heavily armoured, lance-wielding knights. We know how effective a unit like this can be. Maybe not on a map like this, which is more focused around setting up nice defensive positions. If you can get them into a good position, then fair enough, but it might be a little bit difficult to do that. And then the Otorn and Maitimo, which are, of course, the bodyguard unit on foot, sword and board, in comparison to the great maces and heavy swords that my faction wields. Then we also have a trebuchet from him back here as well. Finally, on our side, we have Artorius, who's playing as the Green Elves of Assyrian. In comparison to all of the other factions that they're going to be fighting alongside today, their armour is much lighter, so they are, in terms of an attrition-y sort of fight, technically speaking, the weakest. However, they can offset that by having a lot of very nice archers. The bow is definitely their weapon of choice, I would say. Another ballista as well, so a lot of artillery. The Green Elves also, a lot of their roster can hide. That is a big part of what they're all about. So a lot of their units, we're going to have to wait until later to actually see them. Stuff like the Hunters of Rath Loriel and the Scouts of Galleon and the Spear Host of Galleon will probably be around here as well. My third Entol Galleon, pretty much the heaviest unit of infantry that Assyrian can bring. Pretty expensive, but armor piercing as well. So a good unit all round, but again, expensive. But in a situation like this, definitely a no-brainer to bring them. Some Spear Host of Rath Loriel, and then some Elven Archers, which again on the heavier end of the spectrum with regards to Assyrian's archers. Wielding that two-handed axe in melee as well makes them nice and multifaceted, but you can see a huge portion of their army can hide, which is a big boon, especially on more open maps, but this isn't the case, and obviously with us being on the attack, the only way you can really use a mechanic like that is to try and mitigate skirmish fire coming into you. But that is still a potential annoyance that the defenders are going to have to deal with as Assyrian comes into play, of which there are going to be 3 armies of the Dominion of Tol in Gaurhoth, so Sauron's minions, and then Melkor has also sent over a force from Angband to see how his underling is getting along with his pet project. So, Dominion of Tol in Gaurhoth, definitely the more lightly armoured of the two. Gijax, Garras, Wolfguard are on the heavier end of the spectrum for their infantry, also armour piercing. Will be useful against Feanor, not so much against Assyrian, however, but considering the fact that the other options for Tol in Gaurhoth are going to be lower tier units anyway, it's a no-brainer to bring the Gijax Garras if you can. Lots of Gijax Garras Wolfguard actually, as well as some Gijax Garras Chosen, the Spear variant, a very nice unit to build a defence around, one of the fewer options that Tol and Gaurhoth have as with regards to a really tanky unit on the front line, because of course their armour is a little bit on the light side, which could be a big problem against someone like Assyrian if they've got a lot of archers. But fortunately for them, with superior terrain, they can mitigate that, a lot of that just by positioning. Hishtbukraz Howlers, which are a cheap unit, unshielded, with 2 weapons, so decently damaging, considering they're a very cheap unit, but the big thing they have in their favour is the fact they are locked morale, so you can send them into a situation where they're obviously going to lose, but they will fight to the bitter end, and that can be a really, really useful tool for a unit so cheap. Also, the Hishtbukraz Ash Priests, which this is the scariest unit, which I would say the Dominion of Tol and Gaurhoth have, especially in a situation like this where they can dig in and pick and choose their spots, because they are effectively a javelin unit mechanically, but they throw fiery projectiles to sort of signify Sauron's fire sorceries, and they also have 3 hit points. I mean, this is pretty unheard of so far in the game, outside of monstrous units. So they are really the scariest unit that the Dominion can have, and undoubtedly we're going to be seeing at least 3 of them on display today. So it's going to definitely be the sort of thing we need to be on the watch out for, because they can be really devastating in a choke point fight over a longer period of time. And then in melee as well with those axes, they are pretty vicious. So we are definitely going to have to keep an eye out for them. We got some Gijax Garras Zagulaklab, 2 units of them. So this is the heavier wargs, so they're going to be used in a more defensive fashion, you would imagine, but still very useful. Scarahai Longfangs, which are a unit of basic javelins. I believe this is the non-armour piercing variant. Tol and Gaurhoth have 2 javelins, one of which is armour piercing, one of which is not. I think this is the one that isn't, but not necessarily all that much of a problem, especially if with Assyrian over on this side of the battlefield. Scarahai Blood Drinkers, so the basic unit of shock infantry that Tol and Gaurhoth have at their disposal, and some Howlers as well, some more Howlers here at the back, and there's also some Trappers. I think the Trappers are the armour piercing projectile unit, and the Long Fangs are the other. Tol and Gaurhoth probably have a few hidden units as well, to be fair. They can definitely engage in that sort of thing. We have Scouts of Entertainment, who's going to be another Tol and Gaurhoth army. He's got some Ash Priests. I'm sure he has some Howlers as well, though. He's gone for some Hishtbukraz Zagulaklab, so this is a unit of Javelin Wargs, so he's going to be using them in more of a supporting role. Blood Drinkers, Gijax Garras Chosen. We can see the first of many mangonels. Obviously in a defensive situation like this, the mangonel can be brutally effective if you get it into the right position, but it can be also a little bit unpredictable, shall we say. Longfangs, Scarahai Trappers once again, and a lot of Gijax Garras Chosen and Wolfguard, the heavier units for Tol and Gaurhoth, and then way back over there, some Scarahai Longfangs just there. On the central island, we can see this is where Angband is, played by FFA Muffin. So Angband, in comparison to Tol and Gaurhoth, this is the unit that I would say signifies them the best, the Valar Aukar, otherwise known as the Balrogs. The monstrous units they have at their disposal are very, very powerful. Also, their core of Ironshod units is going to be more heavily armoured and tougher to break down than the more lightly armoured troops from Tol and Gaurhoth. But they are also more expensive, and also They maybe lack some of the nice supporting tools that Tol and Gaurhoth have, especially with regards to javelins. The only options they really have are their artillery and their crossbows, and their Uroloki, to be fair. The Uroloki can count as that as well. Obviously a fire-breathing monster unit, as well as the Troll Guard here, sort of more standard. Wretches of Angband, the cheap units over here. In the heart of things over here, the Spear Guard of the Iron Crown. Iron Shod Halberdiers, which, other than my pikes, the only phalanx unit on display today, which can be a really, really useful tool for Angband. It could definitely help equalise a fight against some superior Elven units if they don't have an answer to them. More Spear Guard of the Iron Crown, more Halberds. A lot of his units are clustered together, so we'll probably have to wait until later on in the battle when they split up. But the monster's definitely the scary thing. There's also some Bulldogs in there somewhere. And then finally, over on this side of things, we can see Steward of Dale playing as the 3rd Tol and Gaurhoth army, playing on their home turf, or at least their stolen home turf. Some more Blood Drinkers, another Mangonel, some Scarahai Longfangs. We can see some Hishtbuk Kraz over here, as well as some Laugskaraz, which are the lighter melee orc, but very cheap for a mounted unit, especially on this scale. Scarahai Trappers and some Hishtbuk Kraz Warband, which again, just the basic foot sloggers for Tol and Gaurhoth. Some Hishtbuk Kraz Howlers, some Scarahai Blood Drinkers. And then over here, more Gijak Scaraz and yet another unit of the very scary Ash Priest. It's also worth saying as well, before we move along, that over here on this little outcropping we can see another unit of a Ballista and yet another Mangonel. So a lot of siege, unsurprising considering the defensive position they can dig themselves into. But without further ado, let's begin. Definitely going to be an interesting fight, this, because I really like how varied this map is. There's a lot of ways that we can approach this as, and as the attackers it's really going to be up to us to decide what we're going to do. So it's also worth saying as well that Feanor have the most direct access into the settlement right from the off. They're definitely the closest, whereas myself, I have to march around this hill somehow. I'm going to go this way and link up with J-Monster, and then we're going to decide what to do when we're stood in front of this initial defence, whether we want to punch right on through, or whether we want to try and risk going through the hills, or maybe try and go across the river with some of our units to maybe support our allies over on the other side. Over here, meanwhile, Feanor definitely not hanging back, in spite of the fact that the Green Elves are a little bit further away. Oof. An initial brutal hit there from the Mangonel right into the heart of the Footmen of Amra, so that's definitely not the start that Uraki was probably hoping for. But it's not too surprising, perhaps, considering the brutal position that this Orc artillery is in, and this is one of the reasons perhaps why it would have behooved them to maybe be a little bit more conservative with their initial approach. Another shot going in from the Mangonel, this one though falling a little bit short, but this fire will remain there for a little while, so as these units pass through they will end up getting burnt. So this is a little bit of a dicey situation immediately here for Uraki, and you can actually see immediately as well the Hishtbuk Kraz from scouts coming forward, so he's going to be able to skirmish with the enemy considering the infantry is leading the way and the archers are a little bit further behind. He's also coming forward, well, FFA Muffins is coming forward with his Balrogs to try and get into that artillery piece very quickly, so a lot of pressure right from the off being put on here. And now the Ballista coming in, maybe not seeing the Feanor Ballista as all that much of a threat anymore. They're going to start pouring punishment here into the Feanor ranks. Feanor still marching forward though, another brutal hit there from the Mangonel, another hit right into the centre of things, hitting some of the Rogue Queni. And one of the problems that Feanor are going to have as this fight goes along is the shield bearers, these men fighting alongside the more hardy elves, are probably going to break if this Mangonel fire keeps up. Now some of the support is starting to come forward from Uraki, but you can see here the Footmen of Amras. This is where having more of a focus around swordsmen and the like is actually going to work against them, because these wargs are going to crash into them. Not as damaging as perhaps it could have been, because these are wargs more focused around dealing with things in melee and on their mounts. Charging in again, getting a little bit caught up on the defenders of Aglon, so it looks pretty grisly here so far for the House of Feanor. But for all the damage he's taking, it's also taking its toll on the attackers that are coming forward. The monsters have taken a bit of damage, as have the wargs, but he definitely needs to get himself organised, otherwise that artillery is going to pick him apart. Meanwhile, over here you can see I actually unfortunately missed this, but the Doriath cavalry did charge in to try and snipe out the Mangonel, and it got most of Steward of Dale's Mangonel crew as well. Unfortunately, as a result of getting caught on a bit of terrain, they weren't able to finish them off entirely, and this is also the end of a large portion of the Doriath cavalry. So some gains were made, but you could also argue that it's a lot of money to dump in to that cavalry without having really silenced the artillery in the way we perhaps would have wanted. Jain still has some of his cavalry over here. As you can see, we're starting to set up our position. Doriath coming forward a little bit faster, and then I'm just following in with my army. But definitely the main event so far in this battle is happening over here, with Feanor continuing to push forward. I mean, you can see here what the defenders are trying to do. They're obviously trying to continue to draw Feanor forwards, do as much damage with them with their supporting tools as they can, and that artillery has most certainly been very damaging. The mangonel definitely proving its worth here. The ballista also racking up a pretty healthy kill count for itself, but Feanor managing to hold themselves together for the time being. The cavalry has managed to do a decent amount of work in helping to turn back the tide. These defenders of Aglon, however, getting a little bit far ahead of their support, and Scouts of Entertainment has managed to sort of prevent the Scarahai trappers from being closed in on in melee by getting some Gijak Scarahs chosen in here to block the way. It's not a perfect block, but there's also a perfect little side-swiping charge they can mount here with the Scarahai Blood Drinkers. Basic shock infantry though they may be, the defenders of Aglon definitely overextending themselves a little bit. You can see up here the Ishbuk-Raz Hunters, not the finest archer in terms of quality, but in conjunction with the artillery and the javelins that have been used so far, it's more punishment that Feanor are taking. But it is perhaps a good thing that Feanor are the ones that are facing this, because with their armour, only really my Finarfin army would probably be more resilient to this sort of thing than theirs, and that's only because the spears would be better against the orcs. Armour values of the two factions are relatively similar on average, when you consider the more lightly armoured humans with the heavily armoured elves. Ooh, and here we can see more punishment coming in for Feanor. The Uraloki managing to hit centre mass. Obviously you can see it's not utterly devastating. Similar amounts of damage to a decently placed mangonel shot though. With the Uraloki in position, with the Gijak Scarahs holding these units in place, it's yet more damage Feanor are taking. But I do think that things look worse for Feanor here than they actually are in reality, because Feanor's army is still intact. It's very damaged, but it's still intact, and they have also done a decent amount of damage to a lot of fairly expensive defending units, and they still have some support. You can see actually the Green Elves also moving forward with some of their horse archers. Interesting decision to bring horse archers. I think once again well yeah, you can see here that the Mounted Company of Regen were charging in, hoping to take advantage of a gap. The Steward of Dale far too quick on the draw there, getting some of his basic Hishtbuk-Raz warband into this pass to prevent them from coming forward. Over here, more arrows coming forward. No rest for the weary for Feanor, and you can see here more of the devastating fiery breath from the vile Uraloki finding its mark. Still, Feanor doesn't say defeat seems certain. The defenders of Aglon doing their best here, their level best, but it is going to come down primarily here to the supporting tools. The mangonel, I think it's going to move over to the other side now to potentially try and do the same thing to us, because it's definitely reaped a bloody harvest over here. And with the Uraloki over here, and with the presence of the ballista still, you could argue they don't need another mangonel over here. So things have started off very well here for the defenders, I would say. They've definitely managed this defence quite well. Feanor moved forward in an aggressive fashion, and it hasn't completely backfired on him, but you would definitely say it hasn't worked out in quite the way he would have hoped, because I think the defenders have definitely handled this pretty well. You can see up here some more shield bearers of Halavorn on the hill, and you can see marching through the hill as well, not only a trebuchet from Feanor, but also the vast majority of the army from Ossiriand. So Assyrian are going to try and take the hill here, not wanting to suffer the same fate as Feanor, and Assyrian would do far worse in that meat grinder down there. Because of their lighter armour overall, they would find themselves in a significantly worse position if they were the ones having to take that off. Back up to 1 speed though. You can see more ballista bolts firing in, so finally the Feanor artillery is starting to do its thing. But I think at this point you can see the ballista crew has abandoned its position, and the ballista is already more than paid for itself for the defenders, I would suggest. You can see over here as well, Steward of Dale's damaged mangonel coming over here, but it still has full ammunition. Not a lot of ammo left in Muffins' mangonel, but still going to be a potential problem here as they switch tack to maybe try and focus on us, as we start to get ourselves into position over on this side as well to try and put some pressure on the defence on this side. I'm going to get my archers of Talath Dirnin in here to try and set up a little bit of early pressure. I've got my defenders here as well. A lot of my army is already over here. So you can see the difference in timing here because of the fact we had to march around the hill. You can see that so far we haven't really engaged. There's only really been some largely superficial charges from Jain Monster's cavalry that has so far really engaged with the enemy. Whereas on the other side over here already, tons and tons of pressure. Sentries of Galleon in position. Fire away. The Archers of Amrod getting some support in there as well. So I mean the supporting tools for the attackers are here. And they still have some reinforcements they can commit. Skirmishes of Wrath Loriel also down here. So Ossiriand getting some support in place. And they still have some sentries as well as what's left of the Roqueni. But a lot of this is skirmishes at this point. Only a few units of infantry in reserve. Hishtbukras hunters trying to fire as some of their arrows are hitting the dirt in front of them, but a lot of them are actually hitting their target. Over here, Uraloki having used up all of their ammunition, charging forward with the Valor Alcar and the Troll Guard of Gothmog, and you can see that. Oof, and again, another mangonel shot coming forth. And with all of these monsters coming forth from Angband, that is going to prompt Uraki to send forward more of his units. Pretty much the last roll of the dice for his melee units, I would suggest. The Otorn, his strongest unit of bodyguard, and some battered defenders of Aglon, as well as a largely healthy unit of footmen of Amras. So you can see here, they're going to get into melee. But through sheer numbers as well as martial might, the defenders will definitely be fancying their chances here. I think the best that Feanor's infantry can hope for at this point is that they bleed the defenders sufficiently enough so that maybe Assyrian can make some gains in the high ground before the defenders can reorganise themselves after their inevitable victory down here, and maybe over here. And you can see actually, we've already decided on a tactic. Seeing the carnage which has happened on the other side and seeing the fact these mangonels are lining us up for a shot, we're not going to take the same approach over on this side as Uraki took on the other. We are instead going to try and go through the mountains, which is going to be potentially risky, because obviously we're going to be fighting uphill. The terrain will favour the Orcs. You can see here the Hishbukras hunters trying to fire on us as we do move over to take this approach. The defenders of Talat and Dianin, however, are going to be able to ward them off fairly quickly, and they're going to retreat. However, my army should be good as the first wave up here, because I've got a lot of reasonably defensive spearmen that I can send in first, but also the bridge wards of Nargothrond, who almost got grilled there from the mangonels. Obviously this is the risk we're running here to try and get through here, because we're going to have to expose the units we're sending over here to the mangonel initially, but nothing too problematic there as they narrowly miss my bridge wards. But in these sorts of choke points, the pikes could be absolutely devastating. As long as they aren't pelted by javelins or ash priests, we should be in a pretty good place. It'll take us a while, however, to get through this very grindy position up here. Even with the support of Jain Monster's more damaging units, it's going to be pretty tough for us there. Meanwhile, Hunters of Wrath Loriel moving downhill as the Green Elves actually have made some pretty decent progress here. They're leading the way with some scouts of Galleon, so doing some support from the high ground with their archers initially. But you can see here that Secretariat is immediately going to come forward with a lot of units here. This one unit of sentries of Galleon is going to be absolutely overwhelmed by all of these Orcs if it doesn't get some support quickly. But the Hunters of Wrath Loriel coming in, the Javelins, so you can see the scouts of Galleon just here to hold them in place for the Javelins to do their grisly work, and they will. Especially against something like the Gijax Garras Wolfguard here, the heavier infantry from the Dominion of Tol in Gaurhoth. That will be very, very useful indeed. Doing their thing. The Ballista is also up here in a pretty exposed place, to be fair. Assyrian's army over here is still sort of deciding how best to set itself up, because I don't think, based on the damage that's being dealt down here, you can see that it is a testament to how tanky Feanor's Elven units in particular can be. The fact that they're still fighting down here, still putting up a decent fight as well. Ultimately, however, there's not enough left of their army. Well, I say that. Assyrian are going to come in here to try and back them up, which will keep this assault going for a little bit longer, and it will also coax more resources into being committed from the defenders. So the defenders, at this point, they've done a lot of good work over here, but they're probably thinking they've done good enough work, they should have won this fight already. But with the support from Assyrian, which has come in, they have been able to keep this assault going. To what end that will be, though, is Assyrian going to actually accomplish anything down here with their Mythern and with their horse archers, or are they just feeding more men into the defenders to be killed. The Okie here, they were initially going after the Ballista, but now they've decided to turn around and go after the rather deadly Rangers of Hellvorn instead. Actually, no, they're going after the Mythern. More Javelins coming in, interestingly enough. Meanwhile, up here, on the hilltop, the engagements are happening. So finally, we're starting to push in as well in these choke points. Defenders of Talath Dianin and Sword Host of Regen. So you can see there the relationship, the symbiosis that Finarfin and Doriath are going to strike up for the remainder of this fight pretty much, because that's going to be our only option considering the losses our team has already taken. A combination of my defensive units and Jain Monster's more aggressive units, especially against Tol and Gaurhoth's units up here. The Gijax Garras are reasonably tanky, but even with their locked morale, the Hishbukraz Howlers are going to get cut to pieces, especially by the Sword Host of Regen and also the Bridge Wards of Nargothrond. Pikes don't do damage very quickly, but against very lightly armoured units like that, shouldn't be too much of a concern. And over here, very much the same thing, only over here we don't have a Doriath unit up here in support just yet. Just a unit of the Bridge Wards and the Defenders of Talath Dianin. So you can see over here the Hishbukraz Howlers are going to be backed up by Scarahai Longfangs in melee, which in terms of the quality discrepancy here, definitely going to be in our favour. It's an interesting thing though this, because the defenders can't afford to send too much up onto that hill from over here, because if they do, we can immediately change tactic and start to march directly towards the heart of their defence. But if they don't send enough up there, we will of course take the hill and then we can start to move back around. Spear Host of the Girdle getting hit there by the Mangonels, who continue to do their thing. This time Steward of Dale firing away with his. Still should have plenty of ammunition, of course. But it is a delicate balance here for both sides, because if we don't commit enough up to that hill, we'll get thrown off and then all of that work will have been for nothing. But if we send too much, we could surrender a lot of good ground to the defenders, which could be pretty grisly for us. You can see over here the Valar Aukar, that mounted company of Karufin going right the way around the map, so going right the way round to try and put some pressure on. So still Feanor being a real pain to the defenders. He may well go on to lose his fight overall, Uraki, but he's definitely making the most of what units he has. Meanwhile, Assyrian continuing to make good use here. It's pretty much the opposite over here as it is on the other side, where we're fighting uphill into the Orcs. Over here the Orcs are having to fight uphill into some units that Assyrian got over here. So it's good that Artorius was able to gain this ground. He's also got his Earthen Tower on the front line. The problem is, it's going to be a matter of sheer numbers again that the Orcs are going to be able to overwhelm. The Earthen Tower will be able to do a lot of damage to stuff like the Gijax Garras, but the numbers definitely not in the Green Elves' favour over here. You can see a lot of these units are still back here. Traversing bridges can be a little bit awkward at the best of times, in all fairness. You can see here arrows still being traded back and forth. Scarahai Longfangs in position, throwing their projectiles, as well as the Hishbukraz Hunters firing away. Back come the Valar Aukar and the Troll Guard of Gothmog once again. The Okie finally fall, but more monsters arriving on the front line. And this, I mean, there's no more reinforcements that can really be committed. There's some Rangers of Hellvorn, some Scouts of Galleon, but not much else, to be honest. And this really is going to be the last hurrah of this assault down here. You can see, though, especially with the arrival of the Assyrian reinforcements and how Feanor have been able to hold on, they've done more damage over here than I'm sure the defenders would have liked. The defenders are still ultimately going to be successful over here, but it will be at a higher cost than they were initially thinking, perhaps. Guardians of the Iron Crown coming forward, so, you know, Angband I think has had enough of the resistance being put up over here. Not only their monsters, but also their heavier infantry being committed forward to try and really hammer this home. You can see the Javelins being thrown in as well. Over here, meanwhile, you can see more reinforcements have arrived on the front line. Warriors of Regen, as well as some more Sword Hosts coming up here to add a little bit more damage. A lot more reinforcements being committed by the Steward of Dale, some more Gijax Garras on the front line. But between my pikes holding them at bay and Jain Monster's army doing the damage, it's going to be pretty grisly for them. Over on the other side, however, it has been a little bit more awkward. You can see I'm trying to get my archers in position to support. I've got more of my units over here committed as well. My detachments, my smaller units of Wardens of Nargothrond and Swordsmen of Talath Dianin coming forward to try and help shore things up and expedite our path through the mountains as quickly as possible. But the Scarahai Longfangs, who have just run out of ammunition, have been firing into our units. Not armour piercing, so not as devastating as it could have been with all the spears pointing in the right direction, but we definitely want to safeguard my pikes, because in this kind of fight, of course, pikes are going to be a real problem for Tol and Gaurhoth to deal with if they don't have the tools over here to actually kill them off. The one thing that I am concerned about, however, and Jain Monster will be as well, will be the Ash Priests. If the Ash Priests can shoot into a blob like this, it's ideal for them, and it will be the ideal equaliser for Tol and Gaurhoth over here. But definitely a slower paced, more grindy fight over on this side with 2 small choke points, but that suits especially my faction quite well. And the damage being added as well is going to be key. The mangonels over here, just menacingly looming, so I'm going to try and get my Ballista in position to try and destroy them at the very least. And you can see over here the Balrogs, the menacing shadow that they cast, the Sentries of Galleon routing, Roqueni Magloro, and this is it, obviously. The final hurrah of Feanor's army. The trebuchets have been caught. I think actually the trebuchet did get a decent hit into the blob, but one hit alone is not really worth the cost of a trebuchet. And now Feanor's army is in full routes pretty much. Even if the units aren't routing, they're definitely going the same way for the time being. The Balrogs catching the scouts of Galleon. They don't want to chase too far because they will leave themselves a little bit more open to Assyrian's army in the hills. But victory finally for the defenders over here. The House of Feanor's main army is gone. They still have some cavalry buzzing around in the back lines, making a real nuisance of themselves and actually doing a pretty good job here, the mounted company of Karufin, charging into the Gijax Garras Wolf Guard. Had to commit forward so much to the front line, the cavalry has actually had an opportunity to do a little bit more damage than they otherwise would have. So got to look for the silver lining here. Ooh, and they actually hit the routing units there, which is going to slow down their charge and allow the Hishbukraz hunters to get a counter charge of their own, but archers that are out of ammunition obviously are going to get run over by heavier cavalry, the likes of which Feanor can commit. Over here, meanwhile, the Green Elves definitely having a good time of it. More of the units have been committed from the other side. Hunters of Wrath Loriel, obviously the Javelins, getting themselves into melee, and Secretariat running out of steam uphill here into Assyrian's forces. Ballista up here as well. Erfinen Tower. The Mythern, however, and Tol Galen were killed down here in this Grizzly fight down here. So Assyrian, wanting to maybe help out Feanor, have ultimately left themselves a little bit undermanned up here on the hilltop. And as soon as these units all turn around and come back to the defence, the Balrogs in particular could be a real worry for them. It was at this point where me and Jain Monster realised that things had not gone according to plan over on the other side of the battle. You can see there that I'm firing away at the mangonels. One of them does go down. Not a lot of ammunition, if any at all, in that one at this point, but my Ballista had a lot of issues with firing, so I'm just pleased to be hitting any target at all. But at this point I think we kind of realised that we needed to hurry things up on this mountaintop, because otherwise we could find ourselves sandwiched between all of the defenders all at once, and if that was going to happen we would need a better defensive position than we currently had, and this hilltop would provide that if we were able to get the Steward of Dale off of it quickly enough. You can see that they are starting to run low on troops over on this side of things, and over here as well defeat seems certain. The sheer quality discrepancy at this point, a lot of the Scarahai and the Hishbukraz are just not going to be up to the task of facing down the heavy spears and pikes from my army. Certainly not against the axemen and swordsmen from Jain Monster's army either. And that's definitely going to be a good thing to deal damage. However, you can see continuous reinforcements are being sent up here, so I think the Steward of Dale also sees that if he can keep us at bay from taking on this hill, how the defenders choose to approach this is going to be quite interesting, really, because they could choose to just let us have this hill and then overwhelm Assyrian and then set up on the middle island, or they could try and keep us at bay over here and maybe try and overwhelm us by crossing the river. There's a lot of ways in which this can still work out, but our objective here is fairly clear. We just need to keep up the momentum, slow as it may be, and at the very least we're obviously causing huge damage over time to the Steward of Dale's army. The best he can really hope for at this point is to hold us in position, unless he's able to get units like this. I mean, you can see here the Hishbukraz, the mounted javelins with their flaming jabbies, will be pretty good at dealing damage. However, more reinforcements, this time from Secretariat, so he's sending over some Gijax Garras, which will be a very welcome addition to this front line. Flaming javelins coming in. You can see Sword Host of Regen, not as durable as a lot of my units on the front line. You can can see here with these Javelins, we're going to try and just put a little bit of extra pressure, try and push through if we can. It's only a single unit of Scarahai Longfangs holding us in position at this point after all. So if we can push our way through, get a couple of units of spears into, or just a few models of spears into the wargs, that will prove to be a bit of a problem for them. Some Blood Drinkers coming down the hill over here trying to hold us at bay, but Blood Drinkers are going to be food and drink really to units like the Bridge Wards of Nargothrond, and especially to units like the Sword Host of Regen. The damage they can do is simply going to be too great. Over here meanwhile, you can see the Mounted Company of Karufin still making a nuisance of themselves, so still being a real pain in the neck, especially for Scouts of Entertainment over here with his Tolt and Gaurhoth army. He's got some Chosen back here now, obviously Gijax Garras Chosen are going to be ideal for finally finishing off the Mounted Company. But that is the thing here with Feanor, like, even if the battle started off really badly for him, he's definitely made the most of what tools he has, and it's one of the main reasons why you really shouldn't give up in a situation like this, because you can still be so useful for your team, and that's definitely what Feanor have done, because if he hadn't have been as much of a pain as he'd been, Assyrian probably already would have been overwhelmed, and myself and Jain on the other side of the river would have been staring down the barrel of facing all four of the defending armies, even if they were in various states of disrepair. The numbers discrepancy probably would have been such that we wouldn't have been able to carry the day there. The Randirim, this is a very key unit. This would be the standout unit for Assyrian because they are rangers. Body piercing projectiles on these guys. The arrow will pass through more than just the first unit it hits. So a hugely powerful tool, especially in a situation like this if you can shoot down a bridge. But they are quite fragile to enemy ranged fire. So we'll have to wait and see how useful they can be. And Assyrian is definitely in danger of being overwhelmed if that's the way the defenders want to play it. Mounted Company of Regen trying to push through, and you can see here we have managed to buckle the lines to a certain extent. Some of my defenders of Talath-Din are behind enemy lines and managed to skewer some of the wargs. They will ultimately break in the end, but this defensive position over here is now in real danger of falling apart. The arrival of the Gijax Garras, which is a little bit too late, and as a result they have added themselves to the front line, but they're immediately being overwhelmed. You can see here, we can see an opening now and more units are being filtered up here. My Archers of Talath-Din coming forwards, and we're just going to try and overwhelm at this stage. Some more Gijax Garras are here. Wolfguard coming up the hill from Secretariat. So interesting. I mean, he is going to be able to shore things up just about with the arrival of more Wolfguard, but we've also got more units on the front line at this point as well, so we're going to be able to continue to put the pressure on. This front line over here as well is still in real danger of falling apart because this unit of Scarahai Blood Drinkers is really the only thing in the way. And they're going to be drinking their own blood here as they continue to get skewered by pikes and bisected by those large battle axes. A lot of our units are still down here though, because we still really don't want to see a counter-attack coming from this direction, and we are also a little bit wary at this point considering the loss Feanor has sustained of being attacked potentially from this river crossing over here, which would leave us fighting a battle on 3 fronts, so we can't overcommit to the hill. Which is kind of the case for the defenders as well. They can't overcommit their defenders to the top of the hill, otherwise it will give us the opening. So it's really a game of cat and mouse so far. Angband are moving forward, so you can see they're thinking, I think, about crossing the river here. And that's going to be interesting to see if they can make that work. Scouts of Entertainment is sending some of his Blood Drinkers up here to try and finish off the Assyrian units at the top of the hill, and he has managed to catch the Ballista as well. And that Ballista didn't use up much of its ammunition at all, so this is actually a big catch for them, trying to disable what artillery we have left. So obviously this can be a really useful tool if we can get ourselves into a dug-in defensive position, especially for Assyrian actually, because that's really their best hope of actually doing damage at this point in time. The Randirim are firing in, and to be fair, the Randirim with their body-piercing arrows will do a ton of damage to the Scarahai Blood Drinkers. I think Scouts of Entertainment sees that as well, but he's also got a fairly battered and bruised army at this point, having been front and centre against Feanor. And you can see here the Randirim pulling out those bows of theirs. They've also still got some Earthen Tower over here at Assyrian. And they'll be very useful actually at dealing with monsters should they come. So even if Angband chooses to come across and try and overwhelm with monsters, all of these Axemen should be pretty good at dealing damage actually. So it will be interesting to see how Angband get on there. Because Angband, rather than crossing the river to go for us, they are going to go from the rear through the hills and to try and sandwich Assyrian between themselves and what's left of Scout's army. Meanwhile, more reinforcements, another unit of Wolfguard coming down here, so you can see Secretariat's Gijax Garras units have shored up the lines, and still, it's been an absolutely brutal fight over here in this choke point. it's always been one as well that myself and Jain Monster's Doriath armies have been very steadily winning. We've been hit by javelins and the like, but nothing too scary up until this point. And we've been slowly making progress, but we haven't been fast enough to give the defenders something to think about, and that has, as a result, obviously Feanor died earlier on, but it is also going to leave Assyrian feeling a little bit isolated. You can see there the Ballista crew thinking of coming over here. Obviously the Ballista crew reasonably armoured. The Mangonel crew as well, some wretches of Angband. So Angband sending over some of their lesser units, perhaps again simply to try and delay us, because we're definitely going to be the last ones left alive, myself and Jain Monster. We simply have much more of our armies left than Feanor and Ossiriand have on the other side. Speaking of which, it's just one Earthen End tower over here. Is this the general? It is. He's trying to save his general. He's sort of sequestering him away right at the back over here. Over here, meanwhile, you can see scouts. He's still sort of caught up on the ballista. Obviously, crossing bridges at the best of times can be kind of an awkward experience, which is one of the reasons probably why Artorias is set up across this bridge. His own ballistas are actually, while they may not be able to fill the role of ballistas anymore, they are actually forming a sort of semi-blockade of the bridge over here, and as a result, Scouts is actually going to save what's left of his units over here and decide to not attack across the bridge. Now this is going to make Angband's life a little bit harder, because I think what Angband would have really wanted would have been to see what was left of Scouts' army crossing the bridge as well, so they could sandwich these units immediately. What this is going to allow Assyrian to do is turn around and meet the Angband charge head on. They will still lose that fight, but they can potentially do a lot more damage to stuff like the monsters, which will definitely help myself and Jain Monster later on. You can see here, Jain Monster actually thinking of going to the aid of Assyrian with a large contingent of his forces. My units as well, I've decided to sort of double down on the push up the hill. So we're both committing, you can see actually over here now, this was a real concern, but fortunately the Gijax Garras fell apart just in time because the Ash Priests got in position, and you can see there the fiery projectiles doing a lot of good damage even with just a couple of volleys here. The wargs also coming up the hill, the Laugs Garras, so the lighter wargs getting into things over here, trying to get in the way. But I'm going to try and sort of swamp the Ash Priest with as much as I can. I've got my general up here now as well. My Sartor Finderato has been up here for a little while, being the core of this push. But sending him in against the Ash Priests is very risky, but we don't really have a choice. We need to shut down those Ash Priests from firing. They're very dangerous in melee as well, but they're more dangerous with their projectiles. Jain Monster's going to prevent reinforcements from coming up the hill, and I'm going to secure what's left of the hilltop. But I've taken a lot of losses getting up here, as has Jain Monster, to be fair. We've got a lot of damage that has already been dealt. Speaking of which, though, it's actually about time. We're back down to half speed, I think, because we're also going to be seeing some action over on the other side. Just a little bit further in the next mountain range along, as Angband come forward. Earthen End Tower getting into a good position. Scouts of Galleon are right there, but the heavy infantry, I mean the problem here, Assyrian's usual strength of being really strong with their archers, still in a good position, but against something like the Spear Guard of the Iron Crown and the Guardians of the Iron Crown, very heavy armour, very heavy shields. Going to be pretty good at dealing with that. And you can see the Bulldogs are also in here, but Assyrian can definitely do a decent amount of damage to these units over here. Over here on this hill, you can see I'm trying to get my archers in position. My archers are actually the only thing I have in reserve at this point, because pushing through did take a bit of a toll. And the Ash Priests over here, while they may be surrounded, they're not outnumbered to a great extent, and they are actually going to be able to fight their way through this. The armour piercing is also going to be really useful against a unit like my Sartor, so we're going to need to get more reinforcements through here. Jain Monster's trying to prevent the wargs from getting through, but the Laugs Garras do manage to squeeze by. Fortunately, I do have my Scouts of Tauren Faroth over here, which with their two-handed spears, all I need to do is get to them, get to the Laugs Garras in melee, and they will get taken out. But my archers are going to be prevented from firing, which is going to mean I don't have the support up there on the hill that I need. We need to get through over here as well as quickly as we can, because we've got a lot of our more quality units over here sort of tied up by this very depleted unit of Gijax Garras. They're on the verge of routing at this point. But we definitely need to push through here. We need to get overwhelming force to those Ash Priests on top of the hill, because they're proving to be a real thorn in the side. Here come the two-handed spears, though, and this is definitely going to be the end of the more lightly armoured Laugs Garras Zagula Club. And over here on this front line as well, you can see the Regen units holding on against the Howlers. I think he can see the issues the Ash Priests are causing, and the warriors of Regen are actually going to pull back to maybe try and help out against them. As long as it's just Howlers and Wargs that are stuck against the Swordsmen, there's no real need to be concerned. And you can see over there the Wargs have been really cut down very quickly by the Scouts. What's left of them over here trying to do some damage. The Ash Priests really doing a number on these units up here. Overall, the pikes should be enough to cause the Ash Priests some problems, but the terrain is such that the pikes are maybe not able to set up as well as they could. And you can see here now we're pushing through. Sword Host of Regen taking the opportunity to push through. All of my spears are going to follow suit. And we're going to be able to take the hill at this point. We are going to be able to take the hill. Jain Monster over here is still marching along quite happily, heading to the aid of Ossiriand, but I think as we look up the hill you can see over here, yeah, I mean at this point Ossiriand are doomed, and I think Jain Monster is going to recognise that and pull back across the river. So it was a nice thought, but just didn't have quite enough time to march his infantry over here to act as relief for the Elves of Ossiriand, and this is going to be quite literally the hill that the Green Elves die on. But, as I said, they are going to be able to do a decent amount of damage here before they fall. Overwhelming force is all well and good, but these Earthen End Tower, especially considering the damage the Balrogs have taken, you can see one of them already fell there. The Balrogs have seen a lot of combat already, so the fact that they're on the front line against heavy axemen over here is going to be really important, because if we don't have to deal with these monsters later on, we can much more easily safeguard our archers, because over on this side, myself especially, less so with Jain Monster because he's gone for more infantry and cavalry, but I brought quite a lot of archers that I haven't really been able to use the ammunition of yet. So especially with my marksmen of Nargothrond and my scouts of Galleon, I've got ammo. The last thing we need is Balrogs getting in and amongst them. You can see there the warriors of Regen, and my archers of Talath Din, and taking some damage from the Ash Priests of Scouts of Entertainment there. Lots of damage. Hits the morale pretty hard as well, but we're well supported enough that we're not going to break here. The Ash Priests just ran out of ammunition, but they're still dangerous in melee, so as long as they can set up their position over here, that's going to be just fine for them. There's still Ash Priests over here in and amongst one of my units of archers. Got some defenders of Talath Din and warriors of Regen over here to overwhelm them. But finally those Ash Priests will be taken out. There you can see a general right in and amongst things, right in and amongst all those spears, but the kicker here is the fact that the hilltop has been taken. And much like the Green Elves over on the other side, we now hold the terrain advantage, which is going to be big, because we had the quality advantage anyway, and it's been a long road to take the top of this hill, but now we have it, and now we should be able to, well, there goes the general that was in and amongst all those spears. But now, the hope will be that we can wipe them away, and if they keep funneling units into us up here, again, with me acting as sort of the anchor, the more defensive core to our army, and then Jain Monster acting as the damage, it's a winning combination here as long as the Orcs continue to funnel units in like this. It's exactly the sort of thing that we will want in this situation. Ash Priests continue. A victory seems certain, amazingly enough, but eventually that isn't going to be the case. Some bridge wards up here on the top, so I still have my pikes. I've got my Arqueni Mormagilwa heading up here now as well, so by far the most damaging unit I have in melee. Over here you can see the Valar Alcar continuing to hunt down what's left of the Green Elves. There's still a lot of these heavier Angband troops. Angband's army definitely in a pretty healthy condition still, but the Valar Alcar getting a little bit further ahead of their support there, and now they're a little bit isolated. To be fair, most of these are scouts of Galleon, but there are still heavy axemen in there, as you can see. Another one of them drops, another one drops. Yeah, that could be a bit of a misplay there, because yeah, these Balrogs are going to die at this point. They got too far ahead of their support there, and even against some of these weaker units, they're just being overwhelmed. So we will not have to deal with these monstrous units anymore. More to the point, still down here, Feanor's cavalry continues to be a problem. There have been less easy targets for them over here, but they're charging into the Wretches of Angband. The Roqueni Magloro is still proving to be a real pain in the neck as well. But yeah, definitely, you can see here the Feanor cavalry doing exactly what we need it to. And slowly but surely, things have started to look a little bit more positive for us in this fight. The sheer bloody-mindedness, I think, of Feanor and Assyrian, to be fair, have done far more damage to Angband and the Toll and Gaurhoth armies that were over on this side of the river than it initially looked like they were going to, because it started off quite poorly. They are ultimately going to lose, but they've definitely made the defenders bleed for it. And over here, there goes my general. My Sartor were committed to the front line earlier more out of necessity than anything else, and now my general has paid the price, but Elven morale should mean that routing is not going to be too much of a concern, especially with the Ash Priest being out of ammunition. That would have been the main thing I'd be worried about. My pikes have rejoined the front line alongside the Axemen, but as I was saying, over here, myself and Jain, we have been victorious to a large extent. So, this battle has definitely developed to be more even once again. Because for a little while there, it was looking pretty dangerous for us, to be honest with you. You can see we have sort of repositioned ourselves into this valley to prevent any sort of side-swiping attack. But I think we are going to reconsider our options when we see what is left. And you can see the defenders also changing tack now as well. They're starting to regroup on the central island before deciding what to do. One unit too many, perhaps, has been committed over here in pursuit of this lost cause, I would say, over here. Like, once this hilltop was taken, I would suggest there was probably good reason for the defenders to not bother to send anything else up here, because now that we have the superior terrain, we were already winning when we had the inferior terrain. Now that the opposite is true, we're definitely going to be well equipped to deal, especially with stuff like the Scarahide. They're going to be no match for any of our units here in a defensive position like this. And Finarfin do very nicely in a slow push, and when you add the damage that Doriath can deal in there as well, it's all good. And now we have a few more units consolidating our position. We're going to leave these units down here, and we're going to start to think about a two-pronged assault down the hill, well, through this choke point over here, and also down the hill over here. So we're finally going to start moving through this choke point, which over on the other side Feanor did right at the start, but in the end, of course, that was their doom. The last of the Green Elves do fall. The Hishbukraz, I think they have actually finally seen the fleeing general of the Green Elves, and they're going to charge him down. But yes, the loss of the Valar Alcar is a big one. There's still 4 Finarfin Tower over here as well. It's my Iron-Shod Halberdiers. The Halberdiers are actually a big concern for us going into the late game, because the best thing we have against them is going to be my ranged contingent, because my pikes at this point, they're still alive, they're still on this front line, but they are very battered at this point. You can see 29 of them remain, and I think there's like 6 or something in the other unit. So definitely not the kind of numbers that you would want going up against more healthy units of Iron-Shod Halberdiers. So that phalanx could be a real concern for us, as could the addition of stuff like the Bulldogs. But slowly and surely, you can see the Ash Priests are still here as well. Scouts as Ash Priests, only 12 of them remain though. The Howlers will fight to the bitter end, but it will be a bitter end, because they are ultimately going to lose the support from my, well, not my Archers of Talath-Din, as we've had my Swordsmen of Talath-Din, and has been very nice as well. Again, I am going to use up all of my Javelin ammo consolidating this victory, but speed is of the essence here. We want to hammer this victory home as quickly as possible and continue the momentum. See over here as well, the Axe Guard of Regen. We're starting to think about an assault with the Mangonels out of ammunition as well at this point, or destroyed. We definitely have the we definitely have more of a clear shot than Uraki had on the other side earlier on in this battle. We're definitely heading into the final stages of this fight, and to a large extent it is going to be me and Jain against all 4 of the other armies, albeit I think Scouts' army in particular is on its last legs. The Steward of Dale's army is also on its last legs. I think for the most part Angband is by far the healthiest army left that the defenders have. Wretches, no need to be concerned about them really. There's technically 1 Valar Alcar left, and it is the general. Still, cavalry proving itself to be just an absolute annoyance over here. And Feanor's cavalry has definitely been the unsung hero of this battle so far, I would say. So obviously it's all well and good to be doing heavy amounts of damage on the front line, holding things down as well, but this cavalry has proven to be something which has prevented the defenders perhaps from being as united as they would like. And you could say a big part of that is early on in the really sort of, well, I was going to say atrocious, but it wasn't really an atrocious fight, it was a brutal fight down here. The heavy walks that were committed early were actually dealt with fairly quickly, and those units in particular would have been so useful for hunting down these cavalrymen, but ultimately they were lost early. And while ultimately you can't say this fight was a victory for Feanor, the damage that was done to the defenders over here was maybe more substantial than they would have liked, especially considering the scale of the victory that we've had over here. The final nail in the coffin was some more Doriath units. There goes the Green Elves General finally, ridden down by the Hishtbukraz. But also, in and amongst things over here, I committed my Arqueni, who didn't take a single casualty, considering the scale of our advantage over here. This is going to be it now. The final battle will take place. And we will finally be able to start attacking the Central Island. Central Island, of course, the centre of the defence. You can see there's still a mangonel over here. You can see that it has been subject to the dreaded Medieval 2 siege glitch where they can fall off cliffs like that, but it is still operational. One of these pieces is still in a position where it does have the angle needed to shoot at us as we move forward. And we don't really have an answer to this thing either, because it's in a position as well where I can't really shoot it with what I have left with my archers. I still have all of my ammunition in my marksman of Nargothrond, but I can't hit the mangonel. I can hit other units, and that will be very important for doing a lot of damage to the infantry here. But you can see what the plan is here. We're starting to close in over on this side. Axeguard of Regen. I've still got my Ballista, which has like one volley left in it, but still every little helps. Got my one unit of Wardens of Nargothrond, and then I also have my Marksman of Nargothrond. You can see Jain is also splitting off a large portion of his army to cross the river as well. This will give... So what our plan is here essentially is to go through the choke point here, as we said, march down from the hill that we took to start putting real pressure over on this side. Jain is also going to cross the river over here to start, well, to effectively give the defenders more angles that they need to be worried about. So he's going to continue to march over here and try and attack from this side as well. This will of course split up their resources as well. The mangonel can only point in one direction. The remaining unit of Ash Priests that I know they have, they're around here somewhere because we've only seen 2 of them die. There's what's left of scouts and his Ash Priest, but I'm talking about a more healthy unit that I believe is for the Steward of Dale. They can only focus on one side. If we blob up into a single blob, the Ash Priests are exactly the sort of thing which could give the defenders the impotence they need to seize this battle by the throat once again. Axeguard, nice unit of line infantry here, their shields will come in handy. Ballista moving forward, and as you can see the army marching down from the hills. Some of the units looking pretty healthy, like the Swordsmen of Talath-Dirnin. Those archers are looking pretty battered and bruised, to be honest with you. Swordsmen, those, yeah, like my Javelin sword hybrids are still healthy because they haven't been in melee really. Wardens of Nargothrond looking pretty battered. My Arqueni are still at full strength, which is nice having a unit like that in the late game. If it comes down to a pure melee scrap, really only the Ash Priests and the Bulldogs could count themselves as having a chance against the Arqueni. But yeah, you can see here the defenders definitely trying to consolidate their force, and they also have a choice to make here, because if they just sit here on this central island, eventually they're going to find themselves surrounded. Because this isn't a massive force from Jain, but they're still going to find themselves getting hit on both sides. You can see over here as well, Jain's cavalry I think is still over here. No, that's right, Jain's cavalry, once again, unfortunately I can only apologise. I missed his cavalry causing trouble up here on the central island, so he did actually get up here with his cav before they were eventually driven off, but still the Feanor cavalry will not let sleeping dogs lie, and they continue to charge in, albeit they're charging into wretches at this point, so the best they can hope for is a break on the wretches, because those spears will start to do some damage, and with the proximity of the spear guard of the Iron Crown, they could also be in real danger from that perspective as well. See over here, continuing to set up. My Ballista I think is actually getting shot at this point, or at least if they aren't now, they will be very, very soon, because they're kind of exposed over here. I'm trying to get them into a good position where I can just sort of, yeah, there they go. I'm starting to shoot with my Archers of Talath-Dirnin as well. I have enough ammunition that I can afford to do this. I'm just going to fire into the Scarahai Longfangs, give the defenders something to think about, try and whittle down what manpower they have remaining. And if we can do that, then our overwhelming strength in melee should be made more apparent, especially if we can take away their supporting units like the Scarahai. A couple of them falling there, but honestly killing them is fine, but just getting them off this nice position for them to use their javelins in is also quite important. You can see I'm still landing some hits in there as well, so all is well and good, because that is a unit of archers where I don't really mind how I use their ammunition. The archers that I'm trying to be a little bit more conservative with are my marksmen. Marksmen of Nargothrond still have full ammo. Those split shots will come in extremely handy if we get into a choke point fight. And that is the ultimate aim here. This Doriath detachment, you can see the Donath and Mablung leading things over here, along with a lot of javelins and a lot of spears. So mostly you can see nice defensive front line, damage dealing javelins, and then a really nice unit of high tier infantry as well as some Wardens of the Girdle. So pretty decent force he's got going on over here. He's going to continue to march forwards, put some pressure on over here, but as you can see from the frames remaining, it's going to be a fast and furious end to this fight, because the defenders are going to come to a decision here. Seeing that Jain Monster has decided to split off a decent portion of his army to go right the way around, and seeing that he's probably going to take a little while before he gets into a position to actually attack the central island, what the defenders are ultimately going to come to the decision to do is to march across this choke point and go onto the attack and try and overwhelm this defensive position, and with their numbers they could very well do it. My pikes are very much on their last legs at this point in time, only 28 of them remaining. I still have some quality units in melee, the Arqueni. I still have some defenders of Talath Dianin as well, but over here in terms of numbers, especially with regards to infantry, we could be overwhelmed. It's going to come down to support. Fortunately I do have support. I have my scouts with their poison arrows, and I have my split shot arrows, and also Jain Monster does still have some units over here, and the Axe Guard of Regen are going to be a very important asset to have on the front line, because they will be able to do damage that most of my units will not. Only the Arqueni will really be able to be genuine damage dealers. Most of my other units of course are spears, but spears will be ideal for dealing damage. There you can see Scouts' Mangonel getting a nice hit there into my Wardens of Nargothrond, and they are shaken as well, so this is going to be the key moment of the fight, really. This is for all the marbles, as it were. Javelins coming in, hitting my defenders of Talath Dianin. My archers of Talath Dianin over there have got not a lot of ammunition remaining, but they're still deciding to shoot in. I wanted to get some shots with my Ballista, but unfortunately all I ended up getting was some friendly fire, so this quick assault initially has borne some fruit for the defenders, and it's going to be a bit of a mad scramble here to try and get this defence back into good working order. And also I was a little bit slow on the uptake here, getting my marksmen of Nargothrond in position. I thought I had a little bit more time to work with, so it is to the defenders' credit that they were willing to move in so quickly. Just having a little look on the other side, you can see this cavalry still over here. Wretches of Angband standing in the way as a bit of a rear guard over here. They inevitably will be crushed when Doriath's forces come over here, but Doriath's units coming in, the Mangonel firing away. But yeah, we definitely need some supporting units over here. There goes an enemy general at the hands of the Axe Guard. More javelins coming in, hitting my marksman of Nargothrond. Not what I wanted, but ultimately I have to put my marksman into harm's way here, because I've managed to save them for this point in the fight, and they will never get a better opportunity to use their ammunition than this. A nice blob fight with some elevation as well, and there you can see devastating hits coming in from the split shot projectiles. Don't want to get too close because of the blood spray. That's a crashing nightmare, I would suggest. But marksman and Nargothrond in good position. The Guardians and Spear Guard of the Iron Crown will be pretty resilient to this sort of thing, but all the other units will die like dogs. And just the overall DPS we're putting in there is going to be very, very important. The Bulldogs are in there somewhere. Routing is going to be an issue. Here come the Hishbuk Raz Ash Priests, however, and they can see the problem that these marksmen of Nargothrond are causing. Damage may be forthcoming here, but the Ash Priests can put a stop to that. At least they can put a stop to one of the marksman units alongside the Javelins that have already made their move. They are going to fire in. Ultimately, when I notice this, at the very least, this is going to prevent me from firing into this blob for the time being, because I'm going to need to deal with the Ash Priests. I need to change my target to deal with them. If we can deal with Secretariat's Ash Priests here, and there we go. They have 3 hit points, so it's going to take a little while before this starts to bear fruit. But if we can deal with them, the best supporting unit they have is going to be dealt with. And then I can go back to firing into the blob. The Ironshod Halberdiers are here. The Halberdiers actually would have been enough to cause serious problems on the front line if not for the archers being in as good a position as they were. Doriath's army over on the other side, however, is eating into the territory over on this side of the battlefield more and more. What's remaining of Feanor's cavalry helping them with a little bit of speed. All of a sudden it's looking a little bit dodgy for the defenders here as the split shots continue to move in. The poison arrows are also firing, and they don't have a lot of ammunition left, to be fair, but I'm firing what little remains in there, and that will be enough to rout off some of the more fragile units, mentally fragile units at any rate. You can see here though, this would have been overwhelming for us, especially with the support of the halberdiers, if it hadn't been for the fact that the marksmen of Nargothrond still had their full ammo. And so it was kind of a blessing in disguise that on the way up the hill I couldn't really use my archers to any great effect. I used my archers of Talath Dirnin and also to sort of consolidate the hill, but the marksmen of Nargothrond couldn't really use them. And so they had their full ammo here in the late game, and at this point it's going to be desperation, and it was a very close battle all the way through, but at this point, with the damage we're dealing on this front line and with this army coming in behind, this is where the snowball will start to happen, and victory for the Elves will be pretty much assured. The Orc Mangonel has been dealt with, routed by the Feanor cavalry, which over on this side of the battlefield, the Feanor cavalry, as well as the defenders, were able to deal with the infantry of Feanor. They weren't able to finish off that cavalry at all, and Uraki made very, very good use of it. A real annoyance. And overall, that was what allowed the slow push over on this side of the river to succeed, because Ossiriand and Feanor, even though they lost ultimately, they were able to make the defenders work over on that side of the river much harder. And our victory over on this side of the river was more convincing than the defender victory over there, which ultimately gathered us our momentum that we needed to go into the final stages of this battle and be victorious. Yeah, the Iron Shot Halberdiers at this point are broken. My marks of Nargothrond out of ammunition. Those split shot arrows, they don't have a huge amount of ammunition, as you would expect considering the damage they can do. Pretty much the ideal situation for them to be in, though. A lot of their units, actually, we may find at the end that they don't get the highest amount of kills, purely because a lot of the units they were firing into were Angband's heavier units, but the DPS they were still putting down in support of the infantry was always going to be enough here to have the desired effects. My Arqueni Morma Gilbert are still in there, still got a decent amount of my spears left alive, so yeah, a decent portion. Jain Monster's army in particular, over on the other side, obviously having not had to deal with the charge over here, is looking very healthy, having wiped away what little remained of the supporting units within the citadel. My scouts now moving forward as well. My ballista at this point out of ammunition, but I've just moved it over there to the side. And victory for the Elves, ultimately. Very interesting fight this, very varied as well. Differing fortunes for every player on the battlefield, I would suggest, on this occasion. And I think it is the Bulldogs that are left alive. They're probably in there somewhere. The Iron Shot Halberdiers are broken and fighting to the death. There's probably some locked morale Bulldogs which are just refusing to give up, so they will have to be slain. But yeah, I mean, outside of a couple of units of Feanor riders, it is just forces from myself and Doriath that remain. And there we go. Tull in Gaurhoth falls back into the hands of the Elves with that victory. A very fun battle to be a part of, I would say. I do like battles like that where there's a clear flow and it's varied as well. It was a very fun battle to be a part of, I must say. And yeah, as I said, differing fortunes for everyone. Like, I got the lowest kills, but that's, I think, a fair reflection of how the armies would interact with one another. I was always designed to be the shield, whereas Jain Monster's Doriath was always going to be the sword, as it were. And it worked out very well over on our side. It was slow going, it was definitely a slog through the mountains, but there was never a moment in the battle where I felt like we were going to lose. The Hishbuk-Raz Ash Priests showing themselves up there was a worrying moment, but we managed to deal with them. And as a result, we never really looked like we were going to lose on that side. It was a slow but inevitable push that we were engaging in. Over on the other side, it was a much more up and down fight, I would say. Like, the balance of power shifted quite a lot. Initially, it was very in favour of the defenders, but it ended up only slightly in favour of the defenders. And I would say that the work that Assyrian and Feanor were able to do, even in defeat, was key. Because if we had to deal with monsters and the like, if we had to deal with more of the armies of scouts and Secretariat than we ultimately ended up having to deal with as a result of Iraqi's cavalry, then I would say that this battle could very easily have gone the other direction. Because if they had just a little bit more in terms of overwhelming force over on this side, our front lines could have buckled, and then my marksman Nargothrond would not have been able to lay down pretty much what was the finishing blows on the enemy army, as well as, of course, J-Monster having the luxury of going around and putting pressure on the backside of the settlement. There's also the fact as well that we were quite fortunate that one of Scouts' mangonels slid off the hill. I don't think that would have been enough to actually change the outcome of the fight, because I had enough archers where if need be I could have shot the crew. But it would have made things a little bit closer, but I still think victory would have been ours. I mean, for me, it was pretty much a nice battle for Finarfin to be involved in. Obviously, a slow but inevitable push up a relatively narrow choke point, the heavy spears and pikes doing the business over a long period of time. The addition of J-Monster's damage was perfect for that as well. You know, a lot of good damage. Like, I'm pretty sure we'll go on to the kills on my units in a minute, and nothing got over 200. But J-Monster's units managed to break like 300, 400 a couple. I think one of his units of heavy infantry managed to get over 400, which is a good indication of the fact that my units were really there to sort of hold the line and his were there to push it forward. And as a result, we really benefited from that symbiosis between us. Over on the other side, like I said, it was a little bit more chaotic, but I do think Artorias and Iraqi really made the best use of what they had at their disposal. As for the defenders, Muffins, Angband, as you would expect, maybe getting the highest amount of kills, his mangonel and his ballista doing tons of damage to the forces of Feanor. But also his monsters and his infantry late on tried to sort of be the finishing blow for the defenders, but ultimately they didn't have quite enough left as a result of the harassment, as I said. Steward of Dale got a lot of kills, to be fair. He did get a lot of kills. His biggest problem, I think, was the fact that he was never in the ascendancy over on that side of things. It was a slog for both sides, but in the end he was always on the downward trajectory, whereas we were always on the upward one, however slight it may have been. Very rarely did it look like he was going to seize the upper hand and keep it. You know, the Ash Priest could have been something that allowed him to do that. If he was going to commit the Ash Priest up there, I would have suggested he actually do it sooner, because by the time he did, his front line was so thin that we were able to push through and engage the Ash Priests in melee. If he committed them sooner, it would have been much more difficult for me to actually respond to that. But again, hindsight is 20/20, as they say. I think Scouts and Secretariat probably had the most difficult battle on this, well, had the most awkward time of it on this battle, because yes, initially especially they were able to do a lot of good damage over here on this side of the battlefield against Feanor and Ossiriand, especially with the support of the artillery from Angband. But as the battle wore on, they took more and more sort of little casualties here and there, and they added up in the late game, because if they'd been able to avoid the fate of their cavalry being dealt with by all of the what am I talking about? I just had my phone go, sorry about that. But by all of the if they'd been able to sort of deal with the cavalry better, if the Gijax Garras heavy wargs had been around longer to sort of hunt them down, things could have been very different, because then they would have had more in the late game to defend that central island, and that overwhelming push would have been more potent. Let's see what did the damage for me, though. You can see that none of my units got over 200 kills, but very differing sort of differing performances from a lot of my units. Definitely the important thing for me was my bridge wards. My pikes in that narrow engagement, considering the fact that the defenders weren't able to kill them with their armour-piercing trappers or their very deadly Ash Priests, meant that slowly but surely those pikes were the ideal anchor, especially in conjunction with the heavy axemen from J-Monster's army. It was always going to be a very brutal thing for Steward to face down without support in an ideal position, and that was ultimately what turned out to be the case. The Arqueni didn't get that many kills, but I had only really committed them to both fights when we were already in the ascendancy. They were always my insurance, sort of my panic button, as it were. If things were going really badly, I'd commit them. In the end, I didn't really need to commit them at all. Wards of Nargothrond did well, Defenders of Talath did, and so my spears, in spite of the fact that they didn't break sort of ridiculous levels of kills, consistent performances across my army. The marksmen of Nargothrond, considering the short amount of time they were firing, 99 kills and 76, it does go to show how resilient some of the more heavily armoured Angband troops are. Even though it looked absolutely devastating, it's not overpowered, especially against the right sort of units. If that had been Hishbuk-Raz Howlers, I think in that little sort of period there we probably would have seen them break like 300 kills, but as it was, against Iron Crown units, they're going to be pretty resilient. Bulldogs were in there as well, but they provided the support we needed, because without them, you know, without those kills, it could have been pretty dicey. But overall, a very, very good fight, and Silmarillion is slowly but surely taking shape, I would suggest. You know, maps like this, I think the balance of things is very nice in Silmarillion as it stands. And as we move forward, I think the next two factions that are sort of going to be added are going to be the Easterlings and the House of Fingolfin. I think that's the plan. So that will be quite interesting to see. Obviously, they're still very much in development, but like I said, if you want to get involved with playing a bit of Silmarillion, then it's more of a must to join the Discord, I would suggest, than it is for Reforged, because Reforged has got a big enough player base where you can just join random games, like I said, whereas Silmarillion, because it's still in development, you're probably going to need to get into the Discord to organise bigger games like this in the open alpha, as this is. But yeah, big thank you to all the players that are involved. Big thank you to J Monster for being a big driving force in the mod. Scouts also streamed this game a couple of days ago, like I said, and big thank you to Steward of Dale as well for making this map. Obviously, I really like maps like this, very multifaceted and very fun to play on. And a big thank you once again to all of the players for being involved in this one. Hopefully more will follow. As for what's next though, probably return to Reforged next, and a return to another siege there, I believe. But again, the schedule is a little bit fluid at the moment, like I said, because who knows when all of this lockdown business is going to end. But yeah, I hope you enjoyed this, and I hope you will join me for whatever is next.